Welcome to another Trusted Teachers video, being the support that we needed. This is Mr. C, and joining me online today is Mr. B.
Hello, everyone.
So Mr. B and I are going to run through a topic on databases, and that topic is all about validation. Now, just before we get started, Mr. B, what do you understand by the word validation? What do you think it means?
Well, out with a computing context, being validated is like where you've proven your point right, just in a normal circumstance. But from my previous studies of computing, it's to do with the data you enter and whether the computer would accept it. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. It's making sure the data we enter is sensible. Validation is the name given to the process whereby the information entered in the database is checked to ensure that it makes sense. It's all it checks to make sure that the information you're putting in makes sense. Additional checks that we can create to make sure data is sensible. That's what validation is. It's checks that we create to make sure that the data entered is sensible. And you'll see there the design view when we're in a table design. The portion down the bottom, you'll see where it has validation rule and validation text. So that's the area that we're going to be working with throughout this short video. So databases do have validation. Databases are, validation in lots of areas. And indeed, when we're in design view, you'll see when we put in the field names, we also specify the data type. That in itself is a check to make sure that you're going to put in text or a number or a date time, but you're forcing the correct type of data to be put in there. So that's already a piece of validation that we have in databases. In relational databases, when we create the referential integrity, we switch that on. Again, that is another type of check to make sure that the entries in a primary key have a corresponding entry in the foreign key. So there's lots of checks in databases, but that's not the checks we're going to focus on today. Checks we're going to focus on today are these 4 checks here: a length check, a range check, a presence check, and restricted choice. I'm interested at this point, Mr. B, if you had any ideas just on what those terms mean. What do you think a length check is about?
Is it to do with the length of like the word, the string that you're inputting?
Yes, it's to do with the number of characters that you can input. Okay, it's not talking about a value, it's about the number of characters that you put in. What about a range check, Mr. B? What do you think a range check would be?
I think I remember this one from my previous studies. Is this where, like, you can enter a number, but it has to be within a certain range?
Yes, it's the data has to be within a certain range. That's exactly it. Presence check is really straightforward. Does the field that you're entering have to have an entry? And we can decide on that. Not every field has to have an entry. It doesn't need to be compulsory. But for
why would that be, Mr. C?
Well, it might be, I might have a database that includes authors' names and their book titles and maybe their web address. Now, some authors may not have their own website, so I may want to have the web address in the database, but it might not be a piece of data that I could get for every author. So I'd make that as a no field in the presence check. I would say no, it doesn't have to be completed. Ideally, it would be, but we're not enforcing it. That's the difference there. And the last one is the restricted choice. Restricted choice, what does that say to you, Mr. B?
Is it only available to certain types of data or certain users?
No, restricted choice, good guess, but a restricted choice is where we restrict the type, the options that a user has. A user is given a limited menu of options that they can put in. We'll go through and look at each of these in turn. The length check restricts the number of characters that we can enter in a field. In Microsoft Access, the default for text is 255 characters. That's a lot of information, and mostly you wouldn't need that amount of information. So efficient programming would be to restrict the text attribute to a sensible maximum. For most fields, it's 15 or 20 characters. We can think here someone's surname. no one's surname is going to have 255 characters. So we would restrict that down to a sensible maximum. And you can see here in the design view where the phone number field here, I've restricted down to the field size of 20. So I can only enter 20 digits. Mobile phone numbers are 11. There may be international dialing codes, etc. So 20, 15 to 20 would be a sensible maximum. And in the validation rule, you can actually see how that would be coded. This is only in Microsoft Access, but that's how it would be coded using Microsoft. You can see the validation rule where we said len, curly brackets, square brackets, the name of the field is going to be less than or equal to 20. So that's a length check. You cannot put in a telephone number there that would be 21 digits long. It won't allow you to do that. And that's sufficient programming. The next one is the range check, and this restricts the range of the data that we can represent. For example, an age attribute for a school database would probably restrict the age range to 18 or under. There aren't going to be any 19-year-old pupils in most secondary schools. So sometimes it can happen, and that might be, you might want to make it less than 19 then. That's how it's implemented there, again, in the design view in Microsoft Access. So you can see the validation rule is less than or equal to 18. And I've actually used the validation text here as well to say that the age field for pupils have been restricted to 18 or under. So I've explained the validation text there is to let other users of the database understand my thinking and my reasoning for applying some of this validation. Okay, moving on, we've got the presence check, and as I said, that's really straightforward. Whether every attribute, every field in a database must have data in it is optional, and we can decide whether an attribute must have an entry or not. Most attributes will be mandatory, but occasionally, due to the nature of the data being stored, you may decide to make that attribute optional. We've all experienced at some point completing a web page sign-up form, clicking submit, and then an area highlighted in red because we didn't fill it in. That's because that's a required field. There's a presence check there and it has to be completed. And in Microsoft Access, you can see in the design view again, I'm still using the phone number field, and I've said down the bottom, you can see where it's a yes or no option next to required. Most of the time that would be yes. Occasionally it may be a no, depending on the nature of the data. And finally, the restricted choice, and this presents the user with a fixed menu of options to choose from. Only one of the options can be selected, and again, it reduces the chance of human error when we're inputting data. Data in a database must be accurate if it's going to be of any use. So we want to do away with as much human error as possible, and that's what these checks are all about. These validation rules are all about. And you can see in the design view, we're not under the general tab anymore, we're under the lookup tab, and we can choose a list box and say it's going to be a value list. And then we can enter, where it says row source, we can enter what we want to appear in this drop-down menu. So this is a skiing database, and there's 3 resorts there, 3 towns, and each of them have got ski runs, but we can only select whether they have beginner, intermediate, or advanced. That's just an example I've come up with.
I can really see how that would cut down on like people just spelling errors maybe, or putting in irrelevant data.
Absolutely, so spelling errors is a great one. I hadn't thought about Mr. B, but certainly the wrong type of data. That's what it's all about when it comes to databases, is the type of data. So just to recap, Mr. B, could you tell me the 4 types of validation rule that we've looked at during the video?
You really put me on the spot there, so let's check that I was listening. So there was definitely length.
Yep.
There was it range, was it called?
Range, correct, yes.
There was, I can't remember the exact term, but whether it was like a required field or not.
Yep, that's a presence check.
Presence check.
Required field is good as well. That's 3 out of the 4.
And the last one was the kind of drop-down menu, like giving them options.
Absolutely, we usually refer to that as restricted choice. So I'm hoping that this short video on database validation is being able to demonstrate the 4 main types of validation rule that we can put in, and the importance of validation throughout databases. So that was another video from Trusted Teachers with myself, Mr. C and Mr. B, being the support that we needed.